Daily Words of God. Within the scope of the work that the Lord Jesus completed in the age of grace, you can see another aspect of what God has and is. This aspect was expressed through His flesh, and people were able to see and appreciate it because of His humanity. In the Son of Man, people saw how God in the flesh lived out His humanity, and they saw God's divinity expressed through the flesh. These two types of expression allowed people to see a very real God, and they allowed people to form a different concept of God. However, during the period of time between the creation of the world and the end of the age of law, that is, before the age of grace, the only aspects of God that were seen, heard, and experienced by the people were God's divinity, the things that God did and said in a non-material realm, and the things that He expressed from His real person that could not be seen or touched. Often, these things made people feel that God was so towering in His greatness that they could not get close to Him. The impression God usually gave people was that He flickered in and out of their ability to perceive Him, and people even felt that every single one of His thoughts and ideas was so mysterious and so elusive that there was no way to reach them, much less even attempt to understand and appreciate them. For people, everything about God was very distant, so distant that people could not see it, could not touch it. He seemed to be high up in the sky, and seemed not to exist at all. So for people, understanding God's heart and mind or any of His thinking was unachievable, and even beyond their reach. Even though God performed some concrete work in the age of law, and He also issued some specific words and expressed some specific dispositions to allow people to appreciate and to perceive some real knowledge about Him, yet in the end, these expressions of what God has and is came from a non-material realm. And what people understood, what they knew was still about the divine aspect of what He has and is. Mankind could not gain a concrete concept from this expression of what He has and is, and their impression of God was still stuck within the scope of a spiritual body that is hard to get close to, that flickers in and out of perception. Because God did not use a specific object or an image belonging to the material realm to appear before people, they remained unable to define Him using human language. In people's hearts and minds, they always wanted to use their own language to establish a standard for God, to make Him tangible and to humanize Him, such as how tall He is, how big He is, what He looks like, what exactly He likes, and what His personality is. Actually, in His heart, God knew that people were thinking this way. He was very clear on people's needs, and of course He also knew what He should do. So He carried out His work in a different way in the age of grace. This new way was both divine and humanized. In the period of time that the Lord Jesus was working, people could see that God had many human expressions. For example, He could dance, He could attend weddings, He could commune with people, speak with them, and discuss things with them. In addition to that, the Lord Jesus also completed a lot of work that represented His divinity. And of course, all of this work was an expression and a revelation of God's disposition. During this time, When God's divinity was realized in ordinary flesh in a way that people could see and touch, they no longer felt that he was flickering in and out of perception, or that they could not get close to him. On the contrary, they could try to grasp the will of God or understand his divinity through every movement, through the words, and through the work of the Son of Man. The incarnate Son of Man expressed God's divinity through his humanity and conveyed the will of God to mankind. And through his expression of God's will and disposition, he also revealed to people the God that cannot be seen or touched, who dwells in the spiritual realm. What people saw was God himself in tangible form, made of flesh and blood. So the incarnate Son of Man made things such as the identity of God himself, God's status, image, disposition, and what he has and is, concrete and humanized. Even though the external appearance of the Son of Man had some limitations regarding the image of God, his essence and what he has and is were entirely able to represent the identity and status of God himself. There were merely some differences in the form of expression. We cannot deny that the Son of Man represented the identity and status of God himself, both in the form of his humanity and in his divinity. During this time, however, God worked through the flesh, spoke from the perspective of the flesh, and stood before mankind with the identity and status of the Son of Man. And this gave people the opportunity to encounter and experience the true words and work of God among mankind. It also allowed people insight into his divinity and his greatness in the midst of humility, as well as to gain a preliminary understanding and definition of the authenticity and reality of God. Even though the work completed by the Lord Jesus, his ways of working, and the perspective from which he spoke differed from God's real person in the spiritual realm, everything about him truly represented God himself, whom mankind had never seen before. This cannot be denied. That is to say, no matter in what form God appears, no matter from which perspective he speaks, or in what image he faces mankind, God represents nothing but himself. He can represent neither any one human, nor any of corrupted mankind. God is God himself, and this cannot be denied.